Howdy folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and today for you I have another Sprocket Community Steel video. Kicking off today's episode with that short little intro clip, we have the T-128 Vulture from World at War 21. But let's dive into today's first tank here. We have the FMU KL-45X, and I'm sure you're all guessing who it's from. Yes folks, that is correct. It is from Substep. Substep with those names. At least I always know they're his, right? And this is his 9-ton light tank for the interwar period. It is armed with a 45mm main gun and has 62.1 millimeters of penetration. Not the best I've ever seen, but it's not really the worst either. And for penetration wise, generally unless you're hitting something with a that's really sloped, it's going to penetrate more often than not. Of course, I'm shooting actually the APHE here, so that's not helping me too much either. But generally speaking, the gun actually did do pretty well. I just had to load in the AP and it would penetrate stuff more often than not. That being said, it does have good effective armor and it's got great mobility. I mean, the vehicle performs for how small of a package he put this in. He kept it lightweight, so you're able to get multiple tanks on the field at one time. And once again, another vehicle from Substep that, while it is a fictional tank, it actually does look like something that could have existed. I also really want to point out the engine deck. I love how he did the engine deck, the engine ventilation, just the general overall design of the whole vehicle, honestly, in my opinion, is really good. But Substep is no slouch when it comes to these vehicle designs that he has come up with that essentially looks like, even though they're not necessarily directly influenced by a specific vehicle that existed, they look like they could have been. Except for one of the other ones that I previously showed, which is the Crab, but the Crab was awesome anyway. Moving on to the next vehicle, we have another interwar vehicle here. This is from Deg4D, and this is his STRV-33FA. It weighs in at 11.57 tons, armed with a 75mm main gun with 85.2 millimeters of penetration. And I actually find the vehicle's performance to be pretty good all the way around. Not the best armored, but it does work. And also not necessarily the most mobile. But also it does well there. It does well in that regard as well. Now, as you can see here, it is a fixed casemate style tank. So it's more like a tank destroyer. Think of along the lines of like a Stug or Hetzer, where you actually have a fighting compartment, even though the fighting compartment's more turret shaped. And it's, you know, that also helps keep the weight down, keep the vehicle more simplistic. So it would actually be cheaper and easier to produce these during a real wartime scenario than it would be a typical tank. That also being said, because he went with a fixed casemate, it's actually easier to mount a bigger, heavier gun inside of a casemate tank than a turret type tank. That's just kind of giving you like a real world, why would you build a casemate tank over a real tank, if you will. And as I said, this performs really well. He does also have a turret version of this, which is the STRV-33. As I said, this is the STRV-33FA. And actually he had a bit of lore too, that it was a combined project with the French military and the Swedish military to create this vehicle, which, as I said, to me is pretty interesting. The next vehicle we have here is the SU-102 by Danio 1417, and this weighs in at 32 tons, and it is armed with a 122mm main gun with 226 millimeters of penetration. Now, I found in some areas the armor is mediocre. However, the mobility of this vehicle is just ridiculous. Really ridiculous mobility. It is another casemate style tank, so that actually does have some flaws in itself, where essentially you don't have a turret to work with. It acts more as a tank destroyer or an assault gun in that case. But as long as you're cautious, you pay attention where the enemies are, make sure they don't get on your flank or anything like that, and you keep your lower glacis plate covered up, it does pretty well. It will bounce most shots. However, you got to be at late war period, especially for the vehicles I have loaded in the game. It can get a little risky with some of the more heavily gunned vehicles I have in the game, such as like the M103. And unfortunately, I've been tracked, so yeah, that sucks. Still a good looking vehicle though. Okay, the next vehicle I have here is a 34.31 ton STRV 81A from Aki. And it is armed with an 80 millimeter main gun, has 150.9 millimeters of penetration. Now, I'd say the armor actually on this vehicle is pretty decent, although the mobility, I don't know. I kind of expected it to be more mobile than it really is. It does okay. It's just not as mobile as I would have expected. And that being said, it does got a really good top speed. So while it's slow getting it off the line, it will get kicked up there pretty fast, or at a pretty good clip once you get it going, especially on like flat ground. Kind of a typical thing for wheeled vehicles anyway. And this is a late war vehicle, even though I'm playing it in a mid-war scenario. And we're just driving around here. I don't know what it is. Sometimes enemies don't spawn on this map for me. I'm not sure if anyone else has that problem or if that's just a me thing. But either way, it's interesting design, nice looking vehicle. Oh, here we go. We got some enemies here. Let's see if we can get some of that cannon action going. All right. Actually penetrated that right through the glacis plate. Or not the glacis, the mantlet. Let's get a second shot off here. There we go. Okay, the next vehicle. This one is also from World at War 21, and this is his Object 800. It weighs in at 65.27 tons. Has a 112 millimeter main gun. That's odd. And it's got 215 millimeters of penetration, so not bad penetration-wise. I do have to say this thing has some awesome mobility. Like, it felt like I was driving a sports car, not a tank. Now, this is designed for the late war period. Now, I kind of get it stuck here because physics and tree and stuff of that nature. There we go. Get it broken free. And this tank definitely has some Soviet influences. You can obviously see it. The way he's got the side skirt ERA set up kind of reminded me of something similar to like the T-72B3 or another vehicle of that sort. It's kind of, he didn't really do a round turret, but it's kind of got that Soviet turret feel where it feel like it should maybe have an autoloader. And it's actually really interesting how he used the machine gun turret on this, even though it does have a lot of modern staples on it that you would see on tanks that are currently being built. So it's all really interesting how he did this design. Let's just showcase some of the mobility here before I move on to the next vehicle. Get it. There we go. Okay, and the final vehicle, this is from Generic Pub, and this is 170-ton Mouse. Mouse! It is armed with a 128 millimeter main gun, and it's got 208 millimeters of penetration. Of course, yeah, the engine, there's a couple of snippets here I have, and one I would say is just move this drive wheel to the front. The engine's actually, for some odd reason, I noticed mounted in the rear, and it makes it kind of it makes the rear heavy by having this big giant heavy turret on the front, and having the engine actually at the, or sorry, not the front, the rear. But other than that, model-wise, it looks really good. I mean, of course, once again, we don't have multi-guns, so it doesn't have the 75 millimeter gun that was mounted next to it. But model-wise, especially when it comes to the turret shape, and I would say the scale seems pretty close to being spot on for a mouse. Now I'm just driving around here a bit just to kind of show off the model and what it looks like. And I decided to run into the barrier just to see something. And yeah, I didn't die. Okay. Normally when I run into those barriers, I automatically die. So it's kind of interesting to be able to run into a barrier and not insta-die. And it's actually got the turret range shield there that the mouse actually had. I think this is the first mouse I've seen that with. And it's got the spare fuel tank. Turret traverse is a bit slow, but it is a really big turret with a really huge gun mounted into it. And turn speed is also pretty miserable, but mouse. Anyway, folks, that's going to wrap up today's Community Steel video. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. Thank you very much for tuning in. And have yourself a wonderful day.